Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Climate Startup Week. We'll just give another minute or two for rest of the participants to join and get started. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Climate Startup Week. This event is brought to you by Climate Collective. We are a non-for-profit in India. We empower climate tech startups across global south by strengthening the local ecosystems. We've been around for 7 years. We've done 70 odd programs and supported 1100 odd startups over the last 7 years. And we're proud to say that 280 of them are women-led. We work with various ecosystem stakeholders such as investors, corporates, other partners who enable the startup ecosystem, and so on. Various programs that we've been doing, and I'm sure a lot of you have taken advantage of all these sessions that we've arranged through these programs for you in last couple of weeks. Um, we have a growing community of about 16,000 members for whom we organize this Climate Startup Week twice a year, which has 30 odd events online as well as offline. We have few networking sessions left. We just have few days of Climate Startup Week now. You can check it out on the website. We'll share the link in the chat. Check out rest of the sessions. We have our Hyderabad and Bangalore climate drinks events. Do join us for that. Will be a great way to network with you all. So today's session on startup opportunities in India's green hydrogen ecosystem, it's brought to you by the India Hydrogen Alliance. The IH2A Alliance is basically an industry coalition of global and Indian companies committed to creation of hydrogen value chains and economy in India. You'll shortly get to know more about it, but some of the members and partners include Chart Industries, JSW Group, BP, European Investment Bank, and so on. Let me introduce today's esteemed panel. We have been able to bring together amazing personalities and leaders from the industry. So with us today, we have Mr. Prashanto K. Roy. He's on the IH2A Secretariat and will be moderating the panel today. He's a leading voice in public policy, technology, and media, and his expertise have been very important in shaping the discourse of technology and energy policy in India. We'll keep it short. His background is around, he's been working with FTI Consulting as a senior leader right now, and formerly he was the director at FTI Consulting. His work with NASSCOM and Cyber Media, India's largest technology publisher, sort of has paved his path here. Beyond his professional endeavors, he's also a sustainability champion. His residence in New Delhi stands as India's first certified green home, which was a pilot project for TERI's Swagriha program. His strategic acumen and deep understanding of policy intricacies have made him a trusted advisor for global firms, and you'll get to know hear from him shortly. On the panel with us, we have Mr. Rajan Anandan. He's a visionary leader when it comes to technology and investment. He is currently managing director at Peak 15 Partners, which was previously Sequoia India and Southeast Asia. Sequoia has around 9 billion USD assets under management, 400 odd companies in the portfolio, and amazing work with 50 unicorns and 19 of them being IPO'd. I'll leave rest of it out. You can read it on the screen. But it's great to have you, Mr. Rajanandan, with us on the panel today. And we also have Dr. Rochan Sinha with us. He is the Chief Technology Officer with Nutrice. He co-founded Nutrice around 2020, I think. It's a Bangalore-based startup pioneering cost-effective and eco-conscious electrolysis solutions for green hydrogen. He is also a distinguished J.N. Tata Fellow, and his PhD was in the field of novel green hydrogen production technologies. Lovely to have you, Dr. Rochin, with us. And the third panelist with us is Dr. Suruchi Rao. She is the CEO at Osus Biorenewables. Osus is again a Bangalore-based startup who is developing AI-powered bioreactors that harness organic content from wastewater in process industries to deliver on-demand and on-site hydrogen gas. She has amazing academic endures, ranging from fellow at Center for Novel Agriculture Products with New York University, and her doctoral in the field of ethanol as transport fuel. Her visionary leadership in this space is an inspiration to many aspiring women in energy today. So please join your hands together to welcome the amazing panel that we have today. Over here, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section, which we'll take post the panel towards the end. And with that amazing start, I hand it over to you, Mr. Prashant.
Thanks very much, Neha. Let's jump right in. I think you would have, of course, this is a climate tech audience. You know about hydrogen. I think we can go straight into, what does this mean in terms of opportunities? Let's just start with, a couple of figures which all of you know, but it's worth just reiterating. 5 million metric tons is what India wants to get to in green hydrogen production in 2030. Okay, 6 million metric tons is the amount of hydrogen. 6.5 million metric tons is what we already produce a year. That's hydrogen, that's gray hydrogen. Okay, almost none of that is green right now. It would be some 0.1% or something like that. Okay, but what does this actually end up meaning? There's clearly, there's this massive opportunity. First of all, this very low-hanging fruit of converting all this gray to green. And if you actually convert it, not all, but even 70% of this gray to green, you're sorted, right? You're well past your target. So clearly there are challenges. The biggest one here is actually cost, because it's worth noting, and you also know this, that out of the 6 million plus metric tons that India produces, about half goes into is refineries and the other half is fertilizers. And there's a small bit in other bits of industrial applications. If that's the case, if fertilizers is taking in 3 million metric tons of gray hydrogen, why is it simply not going green? And that's because there's this massive cost delta, which is, between $2 and almost $6 for green. Okay, how do we get that down? In that, I think what we have found in the work that we are doing with the India Hydrogen Alliance and its members, and Nutrace, which is here, is a member. We're doing some very innovative work. It's great to have Osus here, which has been working on a different aspect of that, not the traditional electrolyzer route. Okay, if you look at what the opportunities are and where they're sitting, there are those sectors straight away tell you, and they give you some problem statements, which leads to the very obvious thing that there are these challenges, and there's a set of a dozen or more, many more actually, problems waiting to be solved. They've not all been solved. They are at the face of it, there's a cost issue. Okay, so let's start with some of these. We've said fertilizers, refineries. Okay, transportation is a major hot interest area. And not just, so transportation, of course, famously our, the MORTH minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, drives a hydrogen-powered car. But beyond that car, there is so much of long distance, long haul, trucking, shipping. So, Maersk, this global company, and, we are working with them through another route. They've taken up 25 ships to actually convert to green methanol use. Our Ministry of Ports and Shipping and Inland Waterways is looking at how to use green derivatives of green hydrogen, which is green methanol, green ammonia, etc., in both the inland waterways as well as for shipping and for bunkering, bunkering of fuel. So I think the point here, and I'll quickly now get to what each of you are doing in this. The point is that beyond the obvious part, which we hear the most about. If you Google for news in hydrogen, you hear a lot about exports, production, export deals. Okay, so that's great. I mean, that's a great, and we've done so well in software services export. So clearly, you can do exports even isolated from a. But we have believed in the India Hydrogen Alliance that you have to look at a foundation of a domestic industry, and there is a lot here to look at. And with that kind of opening context, I'm going to very quickly jump to, let me actually bring in the startups first, if I may. And Rochan, if I could ask you to just very briefly, I mean, maybe take 2-3 minutes to just introduce what you guys are doing at Nutrace and why it was good enough for, Rajan and Sequoia and now Peak 15 to put in a lot of money there.
I think why Rajan chose us, I'll leave it to him to talk about. But I'll talk about what we are trying to solve. So, like you mentioned, Prasanto, the delta between green hydrogen and gray hydrogen is about 5x in terms of cost. And if you want to really solve the challenge of converting all of that 5 billion, 6 billion metric tons of hydrogen to green hydrogen, we need to basically close that delta. Right. This means obviously there are factors such as the solar energy costs and other factors that are coming into picture. But from a hydrogen production point of view, you have to reduce the capital cost and the operational cost for the electrolyzer system that you're building. Right. And each and every conventional electrolyzer technology that exists today has one or the other issues. So, for example, alkaline cannot run with intermittent energy sources. PEM uses iridium, which is extremely expensive. SOEC and AEMs have their own challenges. So what we decided was we were going to build a completely novel technology in terms of an electrolyzer, which does not use any rare earth metals. It reduces the amount of core components, including membranes, which are a big problem for electrolyzers. And we are also going to increase the efficiency. So the idea is that we reduce the capital cost below that of alkaline systems and have the efficiency numbers above that of PEM electrolyzer systems. And that is what we have been doing over the past 2.5 years.
Okay, so you guys have basically done away with the membrane, and you've developed a technology which uses fluid dynamics, among other things, to actually separate that hydrogen and oxygen. Fascinating. So we're going to come back to that, and I want to understand a little more later about how you've taken it from idea to funding and to a scalable product. Sure. So can I come to you? You've now when we've spoken often, I mean, you've taken the waste to energy route, the wastewater to hydrogen route. You believe you've cracked the cost part because you're actually talking of a cost which is which is comparable with gray. But there's obviously questions on scale, etc. But let me not jump the gun. Let me ask you what you do. Why don't you give us a little summary? And again, we'll go later into the funding aspect and how you kind of made it happen.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I'll actually start from the market perspective. We look at the market very differently from how most people are talking about it. We've been doing this for about 7 years now. And back when we started, most people used to ask us what's hydrogen. So OSIS is a company that has figured out how to use a different feedstock than desalinated, ultra pure, or just basically water as a feedstock for hydrogen gas. And as you rightly mentioned, it has a waste value angle. What we talk about is basically taking the organic content in industrial wastewater as the feedstock for making hydrogen gas. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to solve for everything that does not allow hydrogen to be accessible to the ones who will benefit the most, which is industrial decarbonization. We're heavily bullish about it, and we think that's going to be the first frontier. But that can only happen if the point of hydrogen production and consumption are very close. Large industries, particularly the ones that you mentioned, ammonia, refineries, and a lot of the chemical companies themselves produce very, what we call very dense industrial wastewater, which has the potential to be converted into hydrogen gas. And we do that using these bioreactors, which are in essence electrochemical cell. One half of the process resembles a PEM cell where electrons and protons combine to make hydrogen gas. The only difference is that the source of the electrons just happens to be biological in nature. and the protons come from the wastewater itself. Now, the rate of hydrogen gas production in our case is particularly high, but like you rightly pointed out, is there enough wastewater to go around? I can quickly talk about a company that we've signed on a pilot with. They produce nearly 55 million liters of wastewater, which has the potential to be converted to 63,000 tons of hydrogen gas each year. So if you say scale is a problem if OSIS doesn't deliver on its promise of being able to install sufficient number of reactors and produce that 63,000 tons of hydrogen gas. But, and that's something that we are working towards. It has a lot to do with funding. It has a lot to do with how the balance of plant comes together. We obviously need support from those that can help inject our hydrogen into these units where it'll be consumed. But there's another opportunity which we think many people are not talking about, and I know, Prashant, you and I have had a conversation about this, is that we think the number that people are projecting for byproduct hydrogen, and this is something very important we need to talk about. I think I'm taking a little more time on this, but for those who don't produce hydrogen at their site, which would be the ammonia and refinery, which consume a lot of hydrogen, where do the rest of them get their hydrogen from? It's coming from another industry, which is the chloralkali industry. Now, OSIS is trying to disrupt that industry. The price of that hydrogen is around 240 to 360 rupees. It's extremely dirty. It's about 30 tons of CO2 for every ton of hydrogen produced, and the supply is intermittent. But it's currently supplying nearly 3 million tons of hydrogen gas to a single sector, which is the sugar alcohol manufacturing unit. Why is this 3 million tons going unnoticed? Because unbeknownst to most people, India is now the largest exporter of sugar alcohols. And so there's 4 other sectors that also involve hydrogenation, which means they're not using hydrogen particularly to decarbonize. They're using hydrogen as a raw material. But the potential to decarbonize that hydrogen is massive. And the amount of hydrogen they'll require is going to increase. They're catering at about 25%. So we think that number of 5 million tons that the government has targeted is quite conservative. I think that 18 million to 20 million tons is what India is likely to be producing in-house. And that may not necessarily come from ammonia and refineries, but it's going to come from a completely different sector. So we think the opportunity is incredibly large, but of course, policy helps. Of course, having site, I'm sure you're going to talk about site. What MNRE is doing is fantastic. It's brought hydrogen into the spotlight that it deserves. And companies like us and Nutraceous have to deliver on what we've said we can do, which is to achieve all of this at reasonable cost. I won't call it low cost, because obviously you've got to talk about how you're going to consume it, and it has to come from the customer's point of view. And landed cost is extremely important. I'm not going to focus on RE pricing, but that's us, and we think the opportunity is much larger than what we even realize at this point.
Okay, great. So you brought up quite a few interesting things that, and the elements that go into the pricing. The policy part, of course, I'm going to bring that question up a bit. We're not going to delve very deep into policy, but there's quite a lot that's happened between, January of last year when the National Green Hydrogen Mission came out and now, and, there's been a fair bit of progress. But let me go to Rajan. Rajan, you've got, a fair portfolio of climate investments now, maybe a dozen. Last we spoke, and maybe more now. What are you looking for in these climate investments, these portfolio companies? And for Nutrace, for example, what did you look for that caused you to put in your bets and your money?
Yeah, thanks, PK, for having us, and great to be here with Suruchi and Rochan and you. Look, so we're venture capital firms, right? At the end of the day, what do we really look for? We only look for 2 things. We look for founding teams who we think are very capable, in sort of spaces like this, obviously very technically capable, but also have the chops to build a commercial business. So team is very, very important. And second, we look for large problems, right? Where if you solve them, or at least solve some part of it, you could end up building a large company. And then I'd say for companies like a Nutrace, we're also looking for, some validation that, the tech, if you will, that the founders are talking about works as advertised, but not at scale, right? At small scale, because, in many sectors, at Peak 15, we're very comfortable going into a pre-launch company, right? Software companies, AI companies, fintech companies. But when it comes to sort of hardware-centric businesses, be they climate, be they space, be they batteries, be they recycling, be they bioscience companies, we want to see some level of sort of proof that, the founders can get this thing to work at a small scale. Okay. So it's got to be out of the lab, whatever we call sort of the next stage. Different companies call it different stages. So that's really what we look for. We, as you mentioned, PK, I would say our journey, it was in climate at the time. Sort of started with an investment in a company called Log9, which makes batteries and cells, 2019. And then I'd say about 18 months ago is when we really started actively looking across sort of the climate landscape. So think about EV value, EV ecosystems, everything from batteries, cells, recycling, OEMs, things like that. Then you can look at sort of energy transition, which is sort of what we're talking about here with green hydrogen. We've also looked at lots of other companies in areas like solar and whatnot. And then you have sort of the third ecosystem, which is a third area rather, which is agri and food. So we have a company called Absolute in Gurgaon that really works on biosciences. They've launched a set of biopesticides, bio fertilizers, etc. And then the last one is helping large enterprises decarbonize through software, right? So we have several companies like Calix and Unravel, measure Scope 3 emissions, ratings platform for carbon credits, things like that. So it's pretty broad, and we think that obviously we're all in on net zero. We need to get to it. I just saw the news that Dubai is underwater. Who would have ever imagined? They got 1 year's worth of rain in 1 day. So those of you in Bangalore should feel pretty good. Dubai sort of feels like Bangalore today. It's underwater. So we think this is a very serious crisis, and it's going to take lots and lots of innovation and lots of policy change, etc., to make it happen. So that's really what we're looking for. At the end of the day, great founders solving big problems and some level of validation that they can build what they're saying they can, right? So that's sort of what we look for, PK. But we are excited. By the way, if you had asked me, a year ago whether we would be on a panel, PK, you and I, PK and I go back a long way. I call it PK. I think everybody calls it PK. With two extraordinary companies, right, that are founded by Rochan and by Suruchi, both doing very, very interesting things in green hydrogen in a fundamental way, right? I mean, this is not like basic innovation. I would have said no chance, Indian startup ecosystem doesn't do that. And I think it's absolutely wonderful to see companies like this that are truly, truly innovative, right? I was at Google for a long time, for 8 years. I ran Google's businesses in India and Southeast Asia. And every day somebody would ask me, right, where is the Google of India? Well, the Google of India is Google, but hey, look, the Nutrace of the world is Nutrace. Same thing goes for Suruchi's company, So I think this is where we are, India is now beginning to produce, PK, what I call N of one companies. The N is one. Okay. And the first one it is an Indian company, right? So I think it's a very exciting time. Long answer to your question, but that's sort of what we look for. It's not rocket science. We're venture capitalists.
Thanks, Rajan. That's very helpful. That just leads me into one, looking at, it's a fairly wide range you have within the climate tech space in terms of the areas you outlined. It's a scary big space, energy. And energy typically is it's been dominated by global energy giants are what they are. They're energy giants. Okay. In the spaces that we're seeing, in climate tech, in EVs, for example, two-wheeler electric vehicle scooters, there is a fair bit of innovation. But they're very large. If they're startups, they're unicorns. Okay. So I'm just wondering, how do you actually get past that, where you have a startup? So one of the things is that, the kind of project sizes that are being spoken about here and the durations, you have typically 25-year kind of horizons for the CapEx amortization for EV plants and things like that. And the same kind of thing is being spoken about for hydrogen. how do startups actually deal with that? And that has been a problem with startups working in certain technology areas and infrastructure and so on. So, Rajan, maybe I'll just put that to you, that I want both Rochan and Suruchi to take that up.
Yeah, I think you should ask both of them since they're founders building their companies. But keep in mind, look, every unicorn used to be a startup, and every large company was a startup. May have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, right? Tesla was a startup, actually less than 20 years ago. So, so I think that's important to keep in mind. Look, I think this is where my view, at least, is that the government is playing a very important role across many sectors. And I know the government is very focused on green hydrogen, but can play a bigger role. And maybe PK, you and your firm, what you guys do on your day job, can help with that, right? So, for instance, yesterday I was at IDEX. And I think if you talk to, this is pre-IDEX, right? IdeaForge, which is now public, India's first public drone company, right? IdeaForge, talk to the founder, 2015, they got a $7 million order from the Indian Defense Forces. That made IdeaForge, right? So I think it's very important that, especially in these strategic sectors where we want to build highly innovative companies, obviously long-term, look, the way to build a great company is try to have dual use. I mean, you don't want to be entirely dependent on in the defense space, right? I mean, for companies like the two that we have here or many others who are on the call, you can't, ideally not depend only on the government, but the government can be very, very useful. But the second thing is, look, this is what entrepreneurs are really good at. You got to figure out a way to, sell, competing with very large players, and then you have to figure out a way to stay alive. In startup land, staying alive is winning. If you're alive every day, you wake up every day, your company's alive, you won that day, right? So, and it's hard. Look, every successful company goes through many near-death moments, and especially in spaces like this, right? Because a large contract, if it's delayed by 3 months, then that puts pressure on the company. But it's not something, look, it's not a surmountable problem. I think the good thing is, look, when you get these orders, they're large orders, right? Like if you're a software company selling to US SMBs, right? Like your average order value is like $1,000. So you need like 10 customers to get $10,000, right? So Rochan and his co-founder Prasant, they don't get out of bed for a $10,000 order. Get them out of bed to get to a breakfast meeting. You got to be talking about $500,000. So these are also like, it's a different kind of business, right? So.
Okay, lovely. Rochan, Suruchi. So, diving a little deeper into the staying alive question, if you simply look at this space, so electrolyzers, for example, it's a leap of faith for a large organization investing in green hydrogen production facilities, which could well be an oil and gas major, a refinery or something, to basically put their money on a startup where they'd want to be sure that type of product, that type of electrolyzer, or whichever technology is being used for hydrogen production is going to be around for those 25 years that they're planning the project for. So, any thoughts, either of you?
Sure, I can go first. So this is I'll give you a couple of examples here. Both are real world situations. For one of our customers where we have a 250 kg per day deployment currently, hydrogen is a raw material requirement. They're not particularly concerned about the fact that we're a startup. They believe, or they saw enough proof of concept studies for them to say that, yes, there's a potential to generate hydrogen at somewhere around 17 rupees per cubic meter when they're currently paying 36. So the price point is obviously something that they're very sensitive about. But they asked us a question that we had never actually thought about. They said, what happens if you sort of go bust one day? We still need the catalyst that we need to sort of replenish into the reactor every year. What happens to that? Because we still, if we become dependent on you and you're still a startup, and we've heard a lot about startups being volatile. So we had to come up with a strategy where we would create what's known as a culture bank. We use living systems. We use microorganisms as our catalyst. So we had to come up with a separate sort of vertical where we had to bank these microorganisms, give them access, say that, in case of insolvency, this is what you need to do. And we will do a sort of tech transfer, but then, not now. So that was something we had to factor in. Quite quite on the other end, a PSU that we're currently working with, you would imagine PSUs are slow, they ask a lot of questions, they don't want to pay up quickly enough, and working capital is extremely crucial for companies like ours. We may have raised a bunch, but you still need to keep the momentum going. You can't just rely on money that you've raised. It's still static. You still need that dynamic funding coming in the form of actual revenue. The fact that the policy is around and the fact that this PSU is tasked with doling out a bunch of money meant that the proof of concept, due diligence, and all the way up to signing happened really quickly in less than 3 months. And then we got to a stage where they helped us improve the safety, standard, quality, everything for the product, because they're the energy guys. This is an energy PSU, and they know how to take something out of their native sort of context and move it onto a production unit at an oil and gas site in the middle of nowhere, which is primarily installed to produce oil and gas, is now going to be making hydrogen. But that partnership, I think, is very crucial. We've also experienced that with really grateful. We've mentioned them over and over again. So I'll say it's Tata Steel helped us take it from lab all the way up to site. And so to a great extent, these companies help de-risk technologies such as ours, but they also provide the support required to take it from what would be a lab scale, very new, very exciting technology to something that is meant to last 30 years, meant to become the new way you do things rather than just have a very sort of narrow focus on, am I going to get hydrogen at 60 rupees per kilogram? Sure, they do that, but they also help you make that transition. But you have to learn and you have to grow, and that's basically what you do over a period of time. I'm not sure if it answers that question fully.
Oh, it absolutely does. I think it's fascinating. And you brought up, so this example you gave is interesting. So you essentially had to kind of create an afterlife for your, I mean, you had to convince people that if you went bust, there's this thing that you've got, a bioculture lab, which a bioculture bank, which what happens? Somebody else is able to use that in the same way that you do? And
Not
does that
directly.
open up your IP in some way?
No. So the selection of these microorganisms originate from the customer's wastewater source itself. So it's not something new, it's not engineered. It's basically out of the 300,000 communities that they may have, we've reduced it to about exactly the 11 that are required to produce electrons instead of producing carbon dioxide, which is what they would do if they were let to sort of just thrive out in the open. The idea is to bank it like a locker. So this is where the culture strains stay, and they're meant to last 80 years, not 10, not 20. They last about 80 years. And God forbid something goes wrong, the culture bank and how to sort of convert that to a biofilm, maintain that and develop that is knowledge transfer that happens to the customer. And God forbid we never have to do it. But that's information that's basically locked away and is to be shared in case of very bad emergencies. But that's something we had to do. Does it risk our IP? I don't think so, because at the end of the day, you could still take the cultures away and not know how to build the biofilm. Maybe you throw that into the reactor and hope something happens, but that is not how the technology works. So that still remains pretty close to us. But yes, we do have to give them some assurance saying, this is a process innovation for you and not just a way for us to say that we're a startup and we've developed a technology. You're actually selling something, and that's hydrogen. And if this is the key, sure, you can access it in case of emergency. Break the law.
Rochan, if I just pick up on that thread, what Suruchi spoke about is a kind of insurance for that guy who's putting in, a leap of faith and money into a product which he's not sure about its, how long it's going to last if the startup folds up. Is that an approach that you've had to look at? Or so once again, the question is that, if somebody is deciding against, every type of electrolyzer out there pretty much is membrane based, and suddenly you've got this startup from Bangalore with a membrane-less, a new type of electrolyzer. So how do they deal with this question that what if the startup folds up?
Yeah.
Because it's not going to, be around.
So I think Suruchi covered a lot of it, but I'll just say something. So I think these kind of customers, they are not just in there for like just, you can say I have the highest efficiency in the world, but I can make one of it. And if it breaks down, nobody can fix it. They're not looking for that. They're looking for a workhorse. And that is what you have to show them with what you have done already, the proof of concept you have built or whatever. For example, for us, the catalyst is something that is the core, the heart of our electrolyzer, right? And we have done tests which show that they can survive for, let's say, 80,000 hours, which is around 20 years, right, of normal lifetime of the electrolyzer. So these are the kind of, so you have to show them proof points that even if we don't survive, the electrolyzer still lives on. And you have to basically convince them that this is the industrial workers you're looking for. So, for example, the membraneless design, it's not just an innovation for innovation's sake. There is a critical problem that electrolyzer users face, right? Which is that if a membrane ruptures, and this happens every 7 to 12 months for a normal alkaline electrolyzer, you have a 3-week downtime, at least minimum, right? Which is a huge amount of loss for that developer. We are saying that we don't have membranes, you don't need to shut down at all. And we have data for continuous measurements for up to 1,000 hours, for example, right? So these are the kind of things you have to show your customers, and they are actually pretty open. So I think what Suruchi mentioned about PSUs, it's very true. I think they have had this shift in mindset that they can take the risk with new startups if they show that their technology is actually worth investing in, and they take that risk because they understand the current challenges with the current hydrogen production methods, and they know that just using those will not solve the problem of making 6 million tons of hydrogen a year, right? And this is what we and Suruchi and us, we are trying to solve basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think because you have to have a solution that, number one, meets a real problem,
Yeah.
but meets it in a very differentiated, different and better way, right? Otherwise, you can't go there. But by the way, PK, you should write about the fact that these PSUs now are beginning to play a meaningful role in innovation, right? Especially as customers, because I think that is the single biggest thing the PSUs can do, right? Which is especially in some of these hard sectors, or what I call hard tech sectors, you're manufacturing stuff, you're building plants, etc. I think it's a very, very critical role.
No, absolutely. And so we call them the hard to abate sectors. And here the off-taker is critical. So that's actually where the problem currently, or the gap currently lies. So one way to look at the gap is the cost. There's the cost delta. But the other way to look at it is, okay, you need off-takers. So we've got, for example, we've got members like European Investment Bank, or there is, World Bank. They've got a lot of money on the table. There's €1 billion waiting to be invested, but they need bankable projects. Okay, that's where, they need the innovation, the visibility into, the long-term feasibility, and of course, the off-taker. Okay, so if there's no off-taker, and that's where the PSUs, I mean, especially in areas like fertilizer, for example. So fertilizer is a place where 3 million metric tons of hydrogen, and, nobody was moving. But recently, one of the big ones, IFCO, has gone ahead with, an initial, so there's an off-take kind of deal which is being signed with somebody. So it's an absolutely critical area. The off-taker, so right now the off-takers that have been looked at are really large exports largely. But if you look at the domestic off-takers, the PSUs, for refineries, fertilizers, and a bunch of 3 or 4 other major areas. And then of course, when you come to steel and cement, it's a mix of public and private sector. There's large public sector, there's private sector. I want to just come to this question of the cost and the off-taker. So Rajan brought up the off-taker question, and we've been speaking about cost a little bit. I don't know where you guys as startups, you have different approaches to this question of cost. And Suruchi, you're looking at technology, which is currently, I mean, it needs to be scaled, but you've addressed the cost to some extent. But where do you see the biggest disruption in this cost coming from? And, really, what sort of problems are waiting to be solved, sub-problems as it were? I mean, if there was a Tata Nano at one point which needed to be brought out at 1 lakh, okay, whatever happened after that is history. But the point is here, we have to bridge that $4 delta, okay, and if it's already been bridged by a certain technology, then that technology needs to be scaled. So we're trying to, for the audience here, trying to look at where the opportunities are, breaking down this cost delta closure, so that suddenly, we've got 6 million metric tons being consumed. Why is that not all green? How do you disrupt that? So where do you see that disruption? Rajan, could I start with you, since you are, you're in the traditional electrolysis space, as it were. It's funny to say traditional with something that's just, not that. But yeah. you can-
So I think there are multiple points. So like Suruchi mentioned in the beginning, the actual landed cost is a very complex factor, right? If you go and look at the DOE's calculation chart for the sheet they use for calculation, it's like 12 Excel sheets with extremely complicated formulas, which basically let you actually calculate the levelized cost of hydrogen, right? But there are certain things which you can already do which are disruptive. One is the technology itself. If you build something that has extremely high efficiency while it has lower cost, that will already be a disruptive force for reducing the cost of the green hydrogen, the final green hydrogen that you're promising. This doesn't mean just the efficiency, it also means the lifetime, right, which I was talking about earlier. You can basically work on the operating costs. So basically saying not just that your efficiency numbers are good, but that the service time required for your electrolyzer, whether it's because of its modular nature or it is because you don't have a membrane, you don't have service downtimes as much as a normal electrolyzer, which over a course of 20 years definitely adds up, right? So there are multiple ways to look at it. I think the technology disruption is the most important thing that has to be looked at. I think everything else starts to fall into place once that also works out.
Okay, so Suruchi, I'll just widen the question a little bit when I come to you, because you've spoken a little bit about the cost. But in terms of, so there's a question here from Rohit Wedara, who says the amount of renewables required to deliver even 10 million tons per annum of green hydrogen is absolutely huge. Yeah, so that 5 million metric tons, I think, if I recall right, about 125 gigawatts is being kind of associated with that. Okay, that's one. There's water. Okay, water is pretty massive, right? Water is, just directly you need 10 kilograms to get, 10 grams of water to get some 9 kilograms of hydrogen or something like that. But with salt water and the desalination and purification, there's a lot more water that you need. So again, is there disruption there waiting to happen on the electrolysis side? Probably on using salt water directly. On your side, I mean, you're obviously using wastewater, so that's a thing, and I don't know where you project the kind of scale happening there. So taking both of these, and from this question here that Rohit has asked, I mean, essentially, where all are big problems here waiting to be solved? I mean, broadly, we know, yeah, cost, water, the efficiency of these products, etc. But if startups are really looking at getting into the space, where do you see some of the sub problems?
Yeah, Suruchi, do you mind if I just talk about the water bit for 1 second? So for me, the water argument is actually a strawman argument. It's a strawman fallacy. There is, if you're making 6 million tons of hydrogen with SMR, you are using up to 24 kgs of water already for a kg of hydrogen. If you're using coal gasification, and if you're using natural gas, you're still using 13 kgs of water per kg of hydrogen. So it's not like I am suddenly using more water than SMR was using. That's the first thing. The second thing is that seawater, seawater electrolysis is again a illogical thing, because the amount of cost you add to the balance of plant to deal with all the things that are in the seawater is so expensive that your capex costs become insane, right? It's actually cheaper to build an RO plant to desalinate the water, right? It actually just adds 7 cents per kg of hydrogen if you add a RO plant in before your electrolyzer, right? And that's, if I improve my efficiency of my electrolyzer by 0.2%, I cover the cost of RO, seawater RO desalination, right? So I just wanted to make that clear that water is a strawman argument. It's not really as big a problem as people are making it out to be. That's
Okay.
what I was.
I'll one quick point I'll add to that, and I'll jump to Suruchi. That the strawman part applies more, I guess, when you're looking at moving from gray to green, so existing gray replaced with green. But we are looking at much wider use cases for hydrogen. So we want.
Yeah, so for example, let's say Chennai. Chennai is right now using around 250 million liters per day of seawater for desalination, right? Even if you take 10% of that, so 2.5 million, you are still capable of running several 100 megawatt electrolyzer plant right there without reducing the water which is going to the consumers. Right. So it's again, it's a matter of how you see it. I think I agree that yes, if you go from gray to green, but that is what we have to do, because it's not like suddenly people will stop using hydrogen, right? It's actually, it's going to go up, right? It's like we're using 100 million tons in the world.
Yeah. So essentially, sorry to cut you in, but 6 million metric tons of gray, we want to replace that, but we also want to add another 6 million metric
Add more, yeah, like what
And we
Suruchi
want to
was
get to
mentioning,
SA,
there are,
sustainable aviation.
yeah, there are many other industries that are also now picking up hydrogen, so then it will only go up basically.
So Ruchi, let me come to you. You probably might have a slightly different point of view here, since you're already, you've taken some to solving the water problem.
Absolutely. We've been saying this for the last 7 years and we'll continue saying it. We have a drastically different number. Our pitch deck says it needs 9 kilograms. That's 9 liters of desalinated water for a kilogram of hydrogen. We strangely heard a number from IOC, which we're now sticking to, which is 30 kilograms of water. But let me be, let's not get into, is water a problem? Is the price of renewable energy for a problem? Let's focus on one thing at a time. I read a very interesting article in the Hindu, which started out saying that climate change is a problem. Look at what's happening in Bangalore. May of 2024 is going to be the hottest May in the last 10 or 20 years. And then they said, which means that the load on the grid has gone up so and so. People are using air conditioners and fans in Bangalore, which they normally wouldn't, which means that the power plants need to make more electricity. But guess what? There's not enough water to cool down the power plants which are running on coal. So it doesn't matter what the fossil fuel source is that's supplying our grids that we are currently consuming, if there simply isn't enough water. Why isn't there enough water? You can argue one of two ways: anthropogenic activities, climate change, depends on which side of sort of the argument you are. But the fact of the matter is that the way we are moving, water is going to be a very extremely sort of scarce resource. And that means we have to be very careful about how we're going to use it, which could start at a level as low as making sure your taps are off. But when we're talking about the scale at which Rochan and I are sort of talking about the rate at which hydrogen is going to be getting produced and consumed, yes, you would not want to put all your eggs in the water splitting basket. But of course, it's an argument that's heavily loaded in our favor. We say that, you don't need to use fresh water. You can use the organic content. But the best way to look at this is that look at the entire ecosystem, right? For us, the way we look at, for example, we have a customer who is producing aromatic chemicals. Again, they need hydrogen. They produce hydrogen using our bioreactors. They have a methanol cracking unit that's installed. No matter how much hydrogen we produce, so we are slated to produce 7 tons a day at their site. No matter how much hydrogen we produce, they're never going to upend or demob that methanol cracking unit, right? Because they've invested money into it. What they're looking to do is find green sources of methanol. And then you talk about carbon capture, and then you talk about balancing the entire unit. So sustainability has to be an effort that happens on all sort of, it has to happen 360 degrees. It can't just be, I have hydrogen now, I'm going to stop using everything else and I'm going to move only in one direction. We all know that's not something that's going to happen. There are even arguments being made about hydrogen being water being a greenhouse gas. So if I start pumping hydrogen into my cars, and now my tailpipe emissions is just going to be moisture that goes into the atmosphere. H2O is worse than methane and CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So just in terms of a 20 years, 30 years timeline, there's a lot of problems. But right now we're in an existential crisis. So it doesn't matter if, Rochan is talking about using 10 or 30 kgs of water. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from desalinated seawater, whether it's coming from treated wastewater or RO water. If we don't pump hydrogen into the existing ecosystem, we won't even have the next 5 years available to us. So we need to do whatever we need to do in the very short term to survive. We have to do that at a cost where the bottom lines are not affected, because at the end of the day, we do live in a capitalistic world. This is not a socialist community where we're doling out funds to everybody. So everybody needs to survive. And the change has to happen at an extremely large level. Having said that, RE, according to me, is a very small puzzle. Solar and wind has been around. We've had several arguments about, can coal be replaced? Yes, if you make the effort. And the cost differential isn't that high. But the idea is that once again, an argument that 100% favors us a lot, you have to be able to split water at less than 50 to 55 kilowatt hour per kilogram. If you continue to dole out that number, there really isn't enough RE power. So the real disruption there or opportunity is to do it at less. We use a different feedstock, so we need about 0.76 to 2 kilowatt hour per kilogram of hydrogen. But our feedstock is very different. Our process is very different. And we are targeting a very specific sector, which is industrial heat, steam, and raw material. But for everybody else and everything else, you have to you have to create a new market. It has to be a market creating innovation where you're using less power to split water. And that's sort of the only direction we all need to be working towards. If you haven't started, you should. If you're doing there, get there faster. And that's for the electrolyzers.
Okay, got it. So this water question, Rajan, I want to just address, ask you, slightly different form of that. I mean, basically, it's clearly a set of problems around water in the energy transition space, which is pretty intense. Now, everywhere you look, so for example, we are looking at ethanol, there is E20, so there's a mandate to mix 20% ethanol in petrol. Now, ethanol comes from, sugarcane, and sugarcane is enormous, water guzzler as a crop. So clearly there's this mass of problems around water use in energy transition. I don't know if presumably if you came across disruptive ideas from startups there, that's something you would.
Water technology. Do desal at 1/100th the cost. You're going to build $1 trillion company.
So that's going to be big.
Desal at 1/100th the cost. There you go. That's the big idea.
Yeah. So that's
not 1/10.
Yeah, that's
100. Look, I think water is going to be we've talked about a few use cases, right? Like there's a professor, for those of you interested in water, there's a professor at Stanford that does research on water. And I don't know how many of you live in Pune, but like if Pune has 2 years without water, it's finished. Like finished. The water tables are so low and you just can't truck that much water. It's just finished. It's just scary. It's just really scary. 2 droughts, city like Pune, finished. What we saw in the, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu sort of water situation there will look like to that Rajinikanth movie.
So clearly, desalination cheaper, effective desalination.
Yeah, water. In general, solving the water.
Absolutely.
Water problem, right? But it's not a 10-20% problem. It's like a huge.
It's well beyond hydrogen. All the coastal cities would, absolutely wrap it up. I want to just also point you to there's a bunch of questions which are coming up. So I'm going to just stick to the ones which are kind of very closely related. And if there are some specific ones, like for example, there's some questions about Nutrace's the differences with AWE and PEM. I think we'll probably have to take it offline because we have about 5 minutes left. Rajan, there's one question which is, basically Kunal is asking 1 ton per day of hydrogen production capacity requires a capex of 5 to 6 million. Yeah, that sounds about right. How are VCs looking at that as a minimum seed level with the risks involved and with? I'm not sure.
I think venture capitalists. So first of all, venture capitalists will not invest in hydrogen production companies, right? Like, i.e., you come and say, look, I'm going to create, X year amount of hydrogen production.
Right.
That is not a venture. That's more of a late stage sort of private equity, sovereign wealth fund, corporate type initiative, right? Like, I think the kinds of things that venture capitalists would fund would be innovative technologies.
Yeah.
And our inputs, right? Like both the companies here do it different ways, very, very different approaches, different technologies, and so on. But regardless, look, to build these companies out, you do need tens of billions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And that happens over a period of time. So,
okay, super.
I think you have to have, probably the thing, PK, to mention is, at least if you're trying to raise venture dollars, right, you have to be doing something truly differentiated, right? It can't be just, we're going to produce green hydrogen, we're going to assemble a bunch of stuff. That's not that.
Yeah, I guess that's the equivalent of the low-end services market in the whole tech space.
Yeah, exactly. You could be a systems integrator and put all this stuff together. And then there are people who fund those kinds of things too, but they're not the venture capitalists, because venture capitalists are looking for these disruptive technologies that can kind of become very large companies.
Yeah. So clearly, and we don't really have time to go into this, but on the equipment and services market, I mean, that's pretty huge. So all of this, so the already green hydrogen itself requires a bunch of equipment which is already there. So that's what we would call the balance of plant in the green hydrogen space. And the rest of it, the electrolyzers, which are about 40-45% of the entire.
So like if you can make a balance of plant like at 1/3 the cost because of some set of innovations or entirely new way of thinking about it, that's interesting.
That's interesting.
But saying, hey, look, we're going to build a balance of plant and roughly the same, but maybe it's 5% lower because we're going to use less labor or, whatever. I mean, that's just not that interesting, right? It has to be a material difference to what is being done today.
Absolutely. Okay, so for everybody here, if you want to just take a look at the question, so I'll just bring up a question on geologic and natural hydrogen. Okay, so that's been really big in the last year or so. So-called white hydrogen, you find hydrogen basically underground, and yeah, there's no, and it seems to be renewable. I don't know about how renewable it really is. So I don't know any thoughts about that, and that's really a matter of it's not a startup play in terms of technology, is it, or is there some technology that you need to find those reserves of hydrogen if they are good enough and pure enough?
I think if you can find the reserve, just go buy the land. That's a great bet.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like more the sort of thing Reliance would be very actively doing. Looking.
No, I mean, like if you find the land and you're very confident, we might invest in that too. I mean,
Okay, super. So does anybody want to take up any of the other 4 or 5 questions which are there? I think we've kind of addressed. So is there any traction or uptake in fuel cell or tri-generation systems in hydrogen fuel in India? Any thoughts there? So basically on the fuel cell side, there's a lot happening. It's really probably outside the remit of this discussion, but there's pretty exciting stuff happening even for aviation and replacing those motors in ADR-72 with electric motors and fuel cell or SAF, whatever. But sorry, Rochan, were you saying something?
No, I was just saying that for fuel cells, it's kind of like the technology is sort of solved. I don't think unless there's some amazing disruption in the technology, it's just a matter of scaling up to reduce the cost. It's a learning curve that needs to be done for fuel cells. I just wanted to add one point. So I think like Rajan was mentioning, the hydrogen production itself is a very complex ecosystem. And while we have been building our technology, we have realized that there are many parts of the puzzle that we cannot do because we have to focus on a certain thing. We are saying that we are improving the stack, so we are focusing on that. But for example, nobody in India makes hydrogen sensors. That's such a like we don't make hydrogen sensors. We have to import it from outside. If somebody turns up, I think there's one company who's already trying to work on this. But if somebody turns up and says, okay, we are building hydrogen sensors at 10x lower cost than the European counterpart, that is in itself an amazing feat, right? So there are many other things.
Yeah, I'm flying right down to meet you. Please tell me who you are.
Yeah.
So we unfortunately out of time, but there were like quite a few other interesting questions. There's some addressed specifically to Suruchi, some to you. I don't know if we figure out a way to just connect you with the people asking these questions, because some of them are actually pretty interesting. There's of course this one, a fairly standard one about where the big cost reduction is going to come from. And on the electrolyzer side, a lot of it is RE, but we don't really have time to go deep into that. So I think we are just on the hour. So if I can just wrap this up, and thank you all very much for this amazing discussion. There is, I mean, believe me, there is this enormous amount of stuff waiting to happen in terms of the problems waiting to be solved beyond what is already going to happen, which is production of hydrogen for exports. But the foundation to that, all the equipment, the services, the new technologies, the kind of stuff that you're working with, I think there's a lot really waiting to happen there, and a lot more of the dry powder that Rajan has waiting to kind of put into this space. Right?
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much to all the panelists, and thank you India Hydrogen Alliance for conducting this session, especially Shruti and Pragya, who's been helping on the back end, and big cheer to the Climate Collective team as well. Amazing discussion, very insightful, and I'm sure this will encourage many innovators out there to look at this field, which holds lots of promises. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you find a way
We'll connect Yes,
et
we'll
cetera,
connect
we
the
do
folks with the questions to the relevant, yes,
So, thank you.
definitely, Prashant.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Rajan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. I'll just request the Climate Startup Week team to take the downloads of the questions, okay? So we can connect the folks later.